This is the ideal recording for you if you are feeling anguish, frustration, stress, and you want to calm down and get centered. So let's start by taking a slow, deep breath in and slowly let it out. One more time, long, slow, deep breath in and slowly let it out. For the rest of this recording, I will give you a series of affirmations, and I will allow some longer pauses in between for you to repeat them back to yourself, but also to simply relax into the principle of each affirmation. Contemplate each one as you relax and regain your balance. Let's begin. In the midst of chaos, I find peace. In the midst of tension, I find calm. In the midst of frustration, I find silence. In the midst of disbelief, I find faith. In the midst of uncertainty, I find inner knowing. In the midst of fear, I find gratitude. In the midst of anger, I find balance. In the midst of helplessness, I find strength. In the midst of confusion, I find clarity. In the midst of conflict, I find my center. In the midst of anxiety, I find serenity. In the midst of sickness, I find healing. In the midst of division, I find alignment. In the midst of doubt, I find certainty. In the midst of worry, I find tranquility. In the midst of turmoil, I find composure. In the midst of overwhelm, I find the truth. In the middle of a storm, I find the silver lining. Take another breath in and let it out slowly as we bring this session to a close. Well done. I hoped this helped you find a space within you where there is peace, where there is calm, where there is tranquility. And take this feeling with you as you move through the rest of your day. Don't allow the circumstances and the events of the world to influence your disposition. Yes, there's always a time and a place to take action, to express yourself, but you can do that from a sense of confidence and composure and standing in your truth. This is Bob Baker from bobbakerinspiration.com. Make the most of the rest of this day. Let's talk again soon. Until then, so long for now.